welcoming everyone. So, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Center for Policy Research at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, The Open Research Information Transition in the Field of Scientometrics, lesson from CWTS, Leiden University. We are delighted to see participants joining us from different institutions. Uh, for this webinar, what promises to be a highly insightful discussion on a topic that is becoming increasingly important for the future of research evaluation, scholarly communication, and science policy. The research information ecosystem is currently undergoing a significant transformation. Across the world, there is growing interest in moving towards more open, transparent, and community-governed research information infrastructure. This transition has important implications not only for the scientometric research, but also for how we assess research, monitor scientific system, and support evidence-informed policymaking. We are therefore particularly fortunate to have with us today Professor Ludo Waltman, one of the world's leading scholars in the field of scientometrics and quantitative science studies. Professor Waltman is the scientific director of the Center for Science and Technology Studies, CWTS, at Leiden University. His work has made fundamental contribution to bibliometrics, open science, open research information. He has been at the forefront of international discussion on reforming research assessment and developing open scholarly infrastructure. And his research has shaped both academic scholarship and policy debate globally. Today, Professor Waltman will share insights from CWTS experience with the transition towards open research information and discuss what lesson this holds for Scientometrics community and the broader research ecosystem. Professor Waltman, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for taking the time to be with us today. We are truly grateful for your participation. Before I invite Professor Waltman, a few housekeeping rules. Please have your microphone muted. After the talk, we will start a question and answer session. At that time, you can turn on your microphone and camera to directly ask the question, or alternatively, you can type the question in the chat and I will read it out. So without wasting any further time, I would like to invite Ludo to begin his presentation. Ludo, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mumita. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. I very much appreciate having the opportunity to share some of the work that we are doing at my center in Leiden University in the Netherlands. We are, of course, proud of what we are doing. We are happy to share what we're doing, but I also hope that today I can learn something from you, from kind of the developments in India, perhaps also elsewhere in the world, because I'm also very interested actually to learn kind of how things are developing in your kind of local context. Let me go to my slides. So today I chose to have a little bit of kind of yellow, orange type of color in my slides, and it will become clear later on why I did that. As Mumita already mentioned, I'm affiliated with the Center for Science and Technology Studies at Leiden University. I'm the director of the center. I will tell you something about developments at my center in Leiden University. I will focus on one particular thing, namely what we call internally in our language, we call it the open research information transition. The transition that we are going through at my center at CWTS, we usually use the abbreviation CWTS. We are going through an open research information transition, and I will tell you more about that transition. I will also try at the end, depends of course a little bit on time, but I will also try to zoom out a little bit and to look at the broader picture, because I think that open research information transition is incredibly important, but to see its importance, to appreciate its importance, and to also make effective progress, we actually need to understand that transition in the broader picture that I will say something about at the end. Okay. Let me first go a bit more in the details. Like, what is this about? What do we mean by an open research information transition? What do we mean at my center at CWTS? Well, a little bit of background about my center for those of you who don't know it. So as I already mentioned, the center is a research institute at Leiden University. So you see here the building that we are located in, the Willem Eindhoven building in Leiden, a part of Leiden University. We have a history of almost 4 decades as a leading research institute globally in the field of Scientometrics. So we were involved 40 years ago in basically the early days of Scientometrics. I was, of course, not involved myself, but kind of the colleagues at that time, they were involved in the early days of the field of Scientometrics, the first scientometric analysis, for instance, to support research assessment here in the Netherlands and in Europe and ultimately globally. So we built a reputation in that field. We contributed a lot to the development of the field of Scientometrics. I think that also includes, we also need to be kind of reflexive there. That also includes some developments that perhaps have not always been supportive of let's say moving the research system in the right direction. I feel and I guess many of you may probably agree with it. I feel that sometimes we have problems around over reliance on Scientometrics. And well, my center has played a role in the shaping of the field of Scientometrics, both all the good things, but also perhaps the less attractive sides of those developments. The profile of the center at the moment is much broader than just Scientometrics. I want to really emphasize that. We do a lot of work around research assessment reform, open science in its full breadth, so open ways of doing publishing, open access, open data, citizen science, all these aspects of the broad open science agenda. We also do a lot of work around questions related to scholarly publishing, for instance, the role of peer review. So that's basically the world in which we operate. We produce a lot of knowledge through the research that we do, but what we are also very much committed to is to actually use the knowledge that we produce to actually try to contribute to improving the way in which the research system is organized, the way in which the system operates. So we do not just want to produce the knowledge about the system, but we also want to work with stakeholders in the research system in our own country, in the Netherlands, but also more globally. We want to work with stakeholders to actually further develop the knowledge and then ultimately also make sure the knowledge is being used to actually improve the way in which, for instance, Scientometrics is done or the way in which research assessment is organized. So that is also very much what we do at my center. Okay. In light of this scientometric or bibliometric history that we have, bibliographic databases are incredibly important for the work we do at my center. So we produce a lot of statistics about what is happening in the research system, scientometric, bibliometric statistics, and for that we need databases. And traditionally we have always relied on proprietary databases, in particular the Web of Science database. So without the Web of Science database, my center, CWTS, would not have been in existence. The Web of Science database has enabled us to do the things on which we build our reputation. So Web of Science has been incredibly important for us. To a lesser extent, also other databases, proprietary databases like Scopus, for instance, also have played a significant role in kind of the work of my center. And we have significant experience in using these databases. And yeah, we have always valued these databases. We have always benefited a lot from these databases, Web of Science in particular. We have, however, also over time, we have become more and more aware of the limitations and the problems of these proprietary bibliographic databases. I'm going to mention 4 of those. The data is in a way non-transparent. So what I mean by that is that when you have a subscription to these databases, you're able to use the data. And my center, I should probably mention, for instance, for the Web of Science database, we have always had a kind of a special type of license that gave us access to the full raw data in that database. But when you have access to the data, you have a certain degree, of course, of understanding of the data and a certain degree of transparency. Ultimately, however, I would argue that there is kind of a built-in non-transparency in graphic databases that are of a proprietary nature. And this has to do with limitations on how the data can be used, how the data can be shared, for instance, with users that are ultimately supposed to, for instance, benefit from all kinds of analysis that you perform based on the data. Proprietary data providers like Web of Science and Scopus, they impose limitations on what you are allowed to do, what you can do with the data, and that leads to these issues of transparency. So at my center, for instance, we have a rich history in providing bibliometric indicators like publication and citation statistics, providing them to all kinds of stakeholders in the research system, and often then these indicators, they raise all kinds of questions like, oh, this number is surprisingly high, this number is lower than I had expected. What's going on here? What's happening? That then means that you need to be able to see what is behind the numbers. And that's difficult with these types of databases because of the limitations on how the data can be used. And that is actually a very important limitation because it actually ultimately it risks undermining the responsible use of research analytics. If research analytics are not really transparent, if you cannot really see what is behind the numbers, then ultimately we are creating black boxes. And black boxes are kind of a recipe for well, poor use of quantitative statistics. There's also issues around inclusiveness of data sources. So what Web of Science does, what Scopus does, is that they have processes to decide which, for instance, journals they include, which journals they don't include. And there's good reasons for having certain types of processes to make these types of decisions. We all know that there are, for instance, problems around predatory journals. We need to have mechanisms to protect ourselves against that. However, at the same time, I would also argue that the way in which selective databases, like for instance Web of Science, databases that really take a very selective approach to kind of deciding what they include and what they do not include, these databases also lead to problematic effects in terms of inclusiveness in the research system, with lots of scientific journals being excluded from these databases. Even though these journals are perfectly legitimate actors in the research system, and these journals publish research that is completely legitimate, that has gone through proper quality control, and also research that is of significant relevance to all kinds of communities globally or perhaps more locally. And many of these journals are not included in for instance, a database like Web of Science. And this, I feel, is quite problematic, in particular in light, of course, also of the way in which statistics based on databases such as Web of Science often influence research evaluation, research funding, and all of that. Restrictions on the use of the data, so data cannot be shared and then made available for reuse by others. That's a limitation in particular. When you think about commitments that we are making globally to open science, it's really hard to actually fulfill these commitments when you work with proprietary databases. In many cases, it's simply not possible. There's, of course, also the cost of the databases. The databases are expensive. So, for instance, for universities here in my country, in the Netherlands, we have relatively well-resourced universities, but we have significant difficulties paying these types of subscriptions. It's expensive for us, and I imagine that must definitely also be the case for many of you, particularly also in countries like India. So the cost of the databases is an issue. At my center, at CWTS, we made a very important decision. 2 years ago, 2024, we published some new kind of strategic plans. And in these plans, I won't go into too much detail, but we basically announced the start of what we call our open research information transition. So at that time in 2024, we said we want our work at CWTS to be fully based on open research information. And open research information essentially means open bibliographic databases and potentially also other scientometric databases that are open. And open means that the data from these databases can be freely used and reused by basically anyone. So you don't have all kinds of problematic restrictions on the use of the data. So this was the big commitment that we made 2 years ago. We also indicated that this would be a trajectory. This would take a certain amount of time to kind of realize that goal. We couldn't do that overnight. In particular, also because of lots of stakeholders in the Dutch and the European and the global research system that actually we are working with. We are partly serving these stakeholders by providing scientometric analysis. And we wanted to start a process in which we work with all these stakeholders to jointly make that step towards open research information. And open research information can be, for instance, data that we get from sources like Crossref or DataCite, ORCID, OpenAlex, OpenCitations, OpenAir, and others. So this is the agenda that we presented 2 years ago. We then also released the open edition of the CWTS Leiden ranking. So this is, you may know the Leiden ranking. It's a tool for that provides bibliometric statistics on universities. It has a long history based on Web of Science data. In 2024, we, for the first time, released an open edition of the ranking, which is based on data from OpenAlex. So it was an important step for us, and it also showed that it is possible to do these large-scale bibliometric analyses that previously were done based on databases like Web of Science. It was possible to also do them based on OpenAlex data. So here you see, for instance, for the Indian Institute of Science, you see the statistics in the Leiden ranking based on OpenAlex data. Won't go into the details of what all these numbers mean. It's not so important, I think, for this discussion today, but what we were able to show, it is possible to calculate all these statistics in a reliable way based on OpenAlex data from an open source. Well, then you might ask yourself, what's the benefit of all of that? Well, one benefit in very concrete terms is that you can click on the numbers here. So you see all these statistics, you can actually click on the numbers, you can see the underlying data. So when you click on these numbers, you see, for instance, the publications of this institution, the publications that are highly cited, the publications that contribute to the statistics, to the numbers. With proprietary data sources, this is simply not possible. It's not allowed actually to show that underlying data. So you get much more transparent statistics, and transparent statistics, more transparent analytics are also analytics that can be interpreted in more sophisticated ways. And ultimately, we believe that will lead to better decision making. So that's why this is so important. Another way of looking at it is as follows. This is all based on open data that is fully open. Also, all the source codes are open. So this can be reproduced by anyone. So anyone can also check whether the team here in Leiden actually made the right choices in processing the data, and whether our algorithms are correct. Anyone can check it. Anyone can basically reproduce what we did, and if needed, make corrections. Also, anyone who disagrees with what we did, and that's completely legitimate, of course. Some of you may feel like, well, I don't like the choices these people in Leiden made. I think we need different types of numbers. If you disagree with the way we did it, you can do it in your own way. The data is open, the source codes are open, you can just adjust, you can make adjustments to the source codes, and you can calculate things in a different way. You can calculate your own statistics. And this, I feel, is important. If we want to move towards making good use of all the data we have available in the research system, but also using the data in responsible ways, we need to be able to explore the data in many different ways. We need to be able to debate the pros and cons of different ways of using the data. And this requires openness of the data. Okay. Also, in the same year, in 2024, we decided at my center to work together with a number of colleagues from other organizations to actually start an initiative to try to advocate globally for this agenda of open research information. That initiative is called the Barcelona Declaration on Open Research Information. So my center is one of the initiators, but we did it together with other colleagues. And the initiative was launched in 2024. I will say a bit more about it in a minute. What we also did, colleagues of mine, what we also emphasized very much is that the move towards openness is not only a move that is about, let's say, making things more transparent or making things, let's say, less costly. It's also a move to support diversity and inclusiveness in the research system. Because open data sources are also data sources that are open in the sense that they don't impose all kinds of restrictions on what can be included. So traditional proprietary databases, as I already mentioned, they tend to have these selective policies. They have all kinds of policies through which they decide, for instance, which journals they do or do not index. And these policies lead to all kinds of problematic exclusions. Open data sources tend to have open policies towards inclusion. So they basically try to be as comprehensive as possible in terms of what they cover. And then their philosophy is to leave it to users to decide what you feel matters in your specific context, what you care about, and perhaps also what you don't care about. And that's a philosophy that I feel is much better and does much more justice also to the idea that we have many different use cases, and we have users of data sources that find themselves in different countries, in different kind of local contexts. And we should all be empowered to make our own choices that kind of make sense in our local context. And open inclusive databases enable you to do that. So we work together here. This blog post, it was colleagues of mine in Leiden working together with colleagues in Latin America to jointly kind of think about this important point and make the argument. I mentioned already the Leiden ranking, so we still have the traditional edition based on Web of Science data. We also have the open edition based on OpenAlex data. What you will see is that for most universities, if they are included in both editions, the statistics are actually quite similar. There's not really major differences. Ultimately, the traditional edition, the Web of Science edition, is going to be discontinued. So CWTS will actually relatively soon we will provide more information about it, about kind of the timelines for this. But ultimately, we are going to fully move away from Web of Science-based bibliometric statistics, including the traditional edition of the Leiden ranking. And the open way of working, including the Leiden ranking open edition, is going to be the norm for all the work that we do. So we have now basically been working on this transition for 2 years, and we will soon announce the next steps in this transition. And the next steps is basically about getting closer to the final goal of having all our work based on open data. Yeah, you can read here, this is a blog post that we published quite recently. You can read about our agenda for the next few years and our kind of bigger overarching goal, our mission, making open research information the norm. We're also more and more working on kind of developing partnerships with like-minded organizations. I want to mention, for instance, OpenAir. OpenAir is an important actor in this space, an important infrastructure organization in this space. And we are working closely with them, and we expect to intensify that collaboration in the coming years. We are working very closely with them to actually make that transition to open research information. Okay, this is about my center, about CWTS, and about the transition that we are at the moment making, and where we have made quite a lot of progress, but where there's also still some steps that need to be taken. I'm now going to broaden a bit the conversation. I'm going to tell you a bit more about the Barcelona Declaration on open research information, which, as I already mentioned, is a global initiative. So I want to go beyond now my own institute in Leiden, and I want to show you what is happening globally. So the Barcelona Declaration, I mentioned it was launched in 2024 as an advocacy initiative that is promoting openness of research information. Research information is understood in a broad way. You can see it at the left here. It's not only metadata of research articles, it's also metadata of all kinds of other outputs. It's also information about research funding. It's information about the actors in the research system, like individual researchers and research organizations. All that information we ideally want to be open. Open means free to use and free from restrictions on reuse. And ultimately, what you can see on the right side, we believe this leads to important benefits. Transparency, for instance, in research assessments, so more responsible research assessments. It leads to better decision making, for instance, because the data is more inclusive. It is also a way to actually put open science into practice. So lots of reasons why this transition is important. The Barcelona Declaration is a statement in which organizations that sign the declaration make 4 commitments. And I'm just going to briefly explain these commitments to you. So any organization that carries out or funds or evaluates research and that signs the declaration is making the following commitments. The first one is kind of the overarching commitment. It's the commitment to make openness the default for the research information that an organization is using, but also the information that an organization is producing. So most organizations, funders and research performing organizations, universities, most organizations do both. They use research information and they produce it. For instance, a university that subscribes to a database like Web of Science, that is the use of research information by your researcher who may use Web of Science to discover literature or perhaps to compile certain statistics. Universities are also producers of research information. Many universities have internal systems, current research information systems, in which they keep track of all the outputs they are producing. Some universities have university presses through which they produce and publish outputs. In all these processes, information is being generated, and that's the information that universities produce. In the case of the Barcelona Declaration, the commitment to openness applies to both what you use and what you produce, both sides. Second commitment, we will work with services and systems that support and enable open research information. So it's basically the recognition that in order to realize the first commitment, the overarching commitment, you need to have systems, infrastructures to enable you to do that. So working with these systems and infrastructures is critical. Next step then is the recognition in the third commitment that these infrastructures need to be supported. Their sustainability needs to be supported. Can be financially, can in some cases also be done in other ways, but we need to take joint responsibility for sustaining the infrastructures for open research information. And then finally, the fourth commitment is a commitment to support collective action. It's a recognition that for each individual organization, it is extremely difficult to make the transition to open research information. But if you do it together, if you align agendas, if you coordinate between organizations, then suddenly you are in a much stronger position and it is much easier to actually make the transition. So this is a key element of the Barcelona Declaration, the commitment to do it together to support collective action. So these are the commitments. The commitments are aspirational in nature. My university, for instance, Leiden University, which of course CWTS is part of, we have signed the Barcelona Declaration. We are not at the moment fully compliant with these four commitments, but we are moving in that direction. So we have publicly expressed that these commitments are our aspiration. We want to get as close as possible to realizing these four commitments. That's a journey that will take time, but we are kind of moving in that direction. And the declaration has lots of signatories, about 140 organizations globally, in more than 30 countries globally. You see them here on the world map. Well, the initiative was started in Europe, so not surprisingly, we in particular have many organizations as signatories in Europe, but we also have them in Latin America, in North America, US, Canada, a little bit in the Middle East, Africa. What is missing is signatories in countries like China, Australia, so more in the East, and also of course India is missing. So my question, of course, also is who is going to be our first Indian signatory? I want to mention, however, that just looking at signatories can be a bit misleading. What I see is that there are actually a lot of organizations that have not signed formally the Barcelona Declaration, but they are actually working on kind of implementing the commitments. So many organizations, they first want to make considerable progress in implementing the commitments, and only then they want to sign. And this is ongoing in many countries. So many countries where we don't have official signatories, we actually have organizations that are taking steps to become more compliant with the declaration, and then potentially ultimately also to sign. So I see this, for instance, in China. In China, I see organizations moving in this direction, but they are not making a public statement by signing the declaration. And I really hope that also today we can perhaps have a little bit of a conversation about what might be feasible in India. Well, what is happening in more concrete terms? Statements, declarations, and signatures are nice, but it's just kind of paper. It's not very concrete, of course. So ultimately, this should be the starting point for concrete actions. I'm going to show you some things from the Netherlands, because of course I have a very good understanding of what's happening in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, what has happened is that the national funder changed the way the application process for researchers that apply for funding. The application process, you need to submit a CV. Now in the CV, when you provide numerical indicators, in particular citation indicators, the national funder asks you to use OpenAlex for that. Not Web of Science or Scopus, for instance, but OpenAlex. That is the change that the national funder made as a result also of their commitment to the Barcelona Declaration. They made that important change. So that means that universities actually don't need to have a subscription to Web of Science or Scopus to support their researchers in applying for funding. What also happened in the Netherlands is we have a national research evaluation protocol. It's called the strategy evaluation protocol. It was recently revised. In the new protocol, there is a sentence which states that any publication-based indicators that you include in your evaluation, your self-assessment, we expect them to be based on data from open sources like OpenAlex or like OpenAir instead of, for instance, Web of Science or Scopus. So now in the National Evaluation Protocol, we have, as a result of the Barcelona Declaration, we have agreed in the Netherlands to use open data sources instead of traditional proprietary data sources. We also have cancellations of Web of Science or Scopus. So this is Utrecht University, they cancelled Web of Science. This is Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, they cancelled also Web of Science. University of Twente in the Netherlands, they cancelled Web of Science. University of Groningen cancelled Web of Science, and this is Maastricht University, they cancelled Scopus. So you see that many universities, as a result of their Barcelona Declaration signature, they are reconsidering their subscriptions to these databases. So most of these universities had a subscription to both Web of Science and Scopus, and they have now cancelled one of the two. And a potential next step is to also cancel the second database. That's, for instance, also what at the moment is being discussed in my own university. This is what is happening in the Netherlands. So you see all these database cancellations, cancellation of the subscription-based databases. Often then also organizations are starting to support open databases. So that's Barcelona Declaration Commitment 3, supporting open infrastructure. So for instance, organizations become members of, for instance, OpenAlex. Globally, you see similar things. So we see, for instance, in France, we see also a lot of cancellations from the databases. This is Sorbonne. They were one of the first, but at the moment there are actually more of these research organizations in France that have cancelled their subscriptions. And in Sorbonne, they don't have Web of Science anymore. They also don't have Scopus, so they don't have any of the proprietary databases. This is Australia. In Australia, they have a national research evaluation system that is currently being redesigned. And in that redesign, there's lots of discussions ongoing about the use of open data as opposed to traditional proprietary data sources. So this is something that a document from a consultation that took place within Australia, and there you can also see the direction in which they are planning to move. In the Nordic countries in Europe, so in Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, there's also lots of conversation ongoing about the transition to open research information. There was a recent event at which next steps were being discussed. China, there's work ongoing on the China Basic Research Report, which is a report about the state of science in China, also in an international comparative perspective. This report is going to be based mostly on open data in particular from OpenAlex. So yeah, lots of things happening. I thought it might perhaps be helpful to also kind of try to translate this into questions that for some of you in the audience might be of interest and to consider. I was thinking in particular of India, because of course we have quite a few colleagues from India in the audience today, but I realized we may also have colleagues from other countries, and I hope the question may also be relevant for you. So an obvious question is, which bibliographic databases are Indian research organizations currently using? And then the follow-up question is, if indeed at the moment you're relying on proprietary databases, the question is, what are the pros and cons of the currently used databases, proprietary solutions versus open alternatives? Do you feel you have a good understanding of the pros and cons, and do you feel that this understanding might need to lead to any decisions about perhaps switching from one database to another, like we are, for instance, doing in the Netherlands and in other countries in Europe? What's the best value for money, I would also say, is ultimately the question that's on the table. I see that this question is now being discussed a lot, for instance, here in my own country, in the Netherlands. We are asking ourselves that question, like, well, these data sources are quite expensive. There's a lot of money going on in this whole landscape. How can we get best value for money? Is that still perhaps by using the proprietary databases, or should we indeed move to the open alternatives? And as you can see, more and more, that is kind of the direction in which many research organizations in the Netherlands and in some other European countries are moving. And obviously, I already mentioned it, a question also for research organizations globally, but in particular also India, is yeah, what about engagement with the Barcelona Declaration? Could you sign the declaration? Could that be of interest for you? Could you somehow participate in the Barcelona Declaration community? The Barcelona Declaration would definitely very much welcome any organization that has an interest in engaging with this open research information agenda. Also, organizations that are not yet in the position to sign the declaration, we would definitely welcome you as kind of members of this community. Okay, as I announced at the start, I want to briefly also kind of zoom out and say something about the bigger picture. The open research information transition, I feel, is extremely important. But ultimately, in order to make progress here and also in order to really appreciate why all of this is so important, I think the broader picture is important. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time to kind of position the open research information transition in this broader picture. So at the middle here you see open research information, the transition that we have now been discussing. There is an obvious connection to discussions more in general about open science. I would say the transition to open research information is one part of the much broader transition that we are trying to make as part of the global open science agenda and the open science movement. Also, there are very close connections to discussion about how we organize the scholarly publishing system. So what we see is that at the moment we have, in many countries, we have lots of discussions ongoing about how we do publishing. For instance, the transition to open access publishing, the challenges we have around research integrity, around predatory journals, paper mills, the new challenges that AI is creating for all of us, discussions about the opportunities that diamond open access might offer, or models like publish, review, curate. There's lots of things ongoing there. But we also at the same time have very complex conversations about the dominance of large commercial actors in the scholarly publishing system. These are very complex conversations. There's a lot of money at stake. But these conversations are also very much related to the discussion about open research information. Because in order to realize openness of research information, publishers have a responsibility that they should take. Publishers should also contribute, for instance, open metadata of the articles they publish in their journals. That's what they should make available. And many publishers are doing that, but we also have some of the bigger publishers, the commercial publishers, who are actually reluctant to do this, who are not supportive of making metadata of research articles openly available. And there we have a problem. And a problem that I feel needs to be addressed urgently. And this is where you see that the discussion about scholarly publishing and open research information are very much kind of interrelated. Then we have all the discussion about research assessment. Different countries have different traditions in terms of how research assessment is being done, with, for instance, some countries very much relying on metrics-based systems, other countries perhaps relying more on peer review types of approaches. There's also a movement. There's a responsible research assessment reform movement. So many countries are kind of in a trajectory where they are trying to, for instance, move away a little bit from metrics and use more towards peer review, still probably relying on data, on information, on research analytics, but not as the only way to do assessment and to make decisions, but more as a support tool. If we want to move in that direction, if we want to use research information more responsibly in research assessment, that information should be open. I already made that argument, but there's also an argument that goes in the other direction. If we feel that we need open research information, then we also need to make sure that in the way we do research assessment, we don't create a situation where actually our entire assessment system is dependent on closed proprietary databases. For instance, an assessment system that evaluates researchers based on articles in a proprietary database like Web of Science or Scopus, that is very problematic for different reasons, partly because it is problematic from the viewpoint of responsible research assessment, but it's also problematic because it is an obstacle in the transition to open research information. So we need to align these agendas. And there's one more. There's big discussions ongoing about digital sovereignty, digital autonomy. Here in Europe, it's a huge topic. And I'm sure in many other parts of the world, this is also being discussed a lot, perhaps from slightly different angles. But we all understand that in in these times where we have big tech, we have very complex geopolitical situations, that digital sovereignty is something that any country needs to think about. Open research information is, of course, part of that broader discussion about digital sovereignty and making sure that the information that you rely on, the data that you rely on, is data that you can that you control yourself to a sufficient degree, and where you don't have problematic dependencies on actors that you don't trust, or actors that may have agendas that are misaligned with your own agenda. So this is the bigger picture. This is the bigger landscape in which we need to think about all of this. Not easy, but extremely important. Zooming in on the publishing discussion, you in India, of course, have the discussion around your one nation, one subscription system. Mumita, you wrote a lot about that, and I always follow with a lot of interest the things you write about that. I learn a lot from it, from your writings. This is, of course, in your country, in India, an extremely important discussion. So I think this shows like how these complex discussions about how you organize your publishing system, how you choose to allocate your resources to kind of, for instance, deals with big commercial actors, or alternative approaches, much more focused on moving towards perhaps community-owned publishing platforms. These types of discussions are very much tied to the discussions also about open research information. And the challenge is to make these connections and to have an integrated agenda for kind of how you take the next steps in your policy landscape. In the Netherlands, my country, that's of course the country I know best, we are making progress there. It's not easy, but we are making progress. We published our vision on publication culture, where we connect basically all the elements that I showed you on this slide. The conversation about publishing, but also the conversation more broadly about open science, about research assessment, about sovereignty and autonomy, and the open research information discussion. They're all kind of being brought together in this vision on publication culture, which is just a starting point for us in the Netherlands to kind of now start a process where we are going to implement more and more actions towards new ways of doing scientific publishing, new ways of doing research assessment, more openness of research information, and all of that. So this might offer inspiration, perhaps also for other countries. I'm going to conclude this talk by just making a few, conclusions, or perhaps let's call it recommendations, suggestions that I want to offer based on my own knowledge of kind of what's happening in this very complex landscape, and also my understanding of where the system in India stands. And I might misunderstand certain things, so perhaps some of my ideas are a bit misguided, and if that's the case, please tell me. But just a few things I would like to suggest or recommend. I really hope that also the research community in India, the research system, can join the open research information transition. I'm sure that there's already lots of people in India, perhaps some of you in this call, who have thought a lot about this and have perhaps already done all kinds of activities, all kinds of work. I may not be aware of that, and I apologize if I kind of if I overlook important things that are already happening. But I do want to make that invitation to kind of join the open research information transition. And a concrete way, of course, in which that can be done, it's definitely not the only way, but one way in which it can be done is by reconsidering the expensive subscriptions to proprietary databases, and then also consider shifting funds to open alternatives. I showed you what is happening in Europe and, for instance, in the Netherlands. And I guess it's an interesting question for other countries globally to ask the question like, can we and should we make similar steps? I also really want to make the invitation for organizations in India to consider joining the Barcelona Declaration community. You may be in a position where you can actually sign the declaration. Keep in mind the commitments are aspirational. You don't need to be fully compliant with the commitments. It's aspirational in nature. So you're very welcome to sign the declaration. But even if you feel you're not able to sign at the moment, you're still welcome to become part of the community. Then I want to emphasize the importance of, the bigger picture. So moving towards an integrated vision on open research information in relation to these other kind of challenges that we are facing. Open scholarly publishing, research assessment, the broader issues around sovereignty and autonomy. So I feel there is a need to move towards a more integrated vision. It's important, I guess, for organization in India, in your country, but this applies to any country. This also applies to my own country. But we need to also all develop and align with international best practices. Of course, taking into account that we all have a different local context. Investing in national expertise is one more thing I want to highlight. I feel that in the Netherlands we have been able to make significant progress thanks to the fact that resources have been made available. People were in a position where they could spend time to think about all these issues and to actually make plans and agree on policies. I myself have benefited from that. This is important. So investing in national expertise in meta science, in scholarly publishing, in research assessment, it's quite critical to really be able to make progress in this complex landscape. And I would also argue that you will earn back these investments. It's a relatively modest investment that you need to make in the short term, but you're definitely going to earn it back because you will be able to make better choices in terms of database that you subscribe to, in terms of the way you organize your publishing system. So that might lead to significant cost savings. But perhaps the most important thing, ultimately, this is going to better position your research system. It's going to better position your system in the global landscape, and also it's going to better position your system with respect to the big challenges that we're all facing globally, that society is facing in the 21st century, and where society has high expectations from the research system to kind of provide solutions. And if that's what society expects, and if the research system wants to kind of deliver on that expectation, on the promise of providing solutions, then we need to take these steps. We need to change the way we deal with the data that we use for decision making, for research assessment. We need to rethink the way we do publishing. We have a system at the moment that is not really fit for purpose in the 21st century. And that's a problem for all of us globally, and it's really important that we are going to take some significant steps there. Okay, I would like to thank you for your attention. I really appreciate having the opportunity to share my ideas on all of this with you. I also look forward to strengthening collaboration with the center in Bangalore, but also more in general, of course, with colleagues in India and elsewhere. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ludo. That was, I think, really overwhelming, and I think we got a lot of information to process. And also, even before going for the question answer session, I would really also would like to tell something like the work that we do at our center, DSC Center for Policy Research, is all started with Professor Subbaiah Arunachalam, who invited you to give this talk today. And his work has inspired us, and you probably have maybe know, he's called the Open Access Man of India. So he really brought all this discussion in our country, and we're kind of following his footstep to take it forward to see where we do and what for our country and for the society. So I think this is now the time for question and answer. And I would request colleagues to raise their hand, and I will call the name as it appear on my screen. I'll ask the question directly to you. So yeah, if anybody has question, please raise the hand. Okay, I think I already see a colleague. Vikram Jairam, can you please ask your question?
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. A couple of questions. What is your business model? I mean, I understand the commercial options we have are expensive. So what is your business model in this?
Well, I'm myself not in the business of providing data sources, making data sources available. So in that sense, I don't have a business model. I see myself more as someone who is positioned, and my center as a bit more downstream. So we are users of data. But what you see is that organizations like OpenAlex, but also others, they have thought quite a lot about how you can make data openly available while still having business models that enable your organization, your data source, to be sustainable in the longer term. So OpenAlex has a membership model where organizations can become paid members of OpenAlex. They can pay a certain amount of money, 5 or 10 or 20,000 US dollars, I think. So there's different tiers, and members get additional things on top of the basic data. So you don't need to become a member to have access to the data, but if you do become a member, there's a few more additional services that you have access to. So that is one particular business model.
I mean, because I've looked at some journals that are going over to Diamond Access and so on, and in a sense, they're still relying on subscriptions from libraries as a means of making their articles open access. It's based on an expectation, and I'm not sure how far it has worked out or is likely to work out, but they're optimistic about it. Yeah, thank you.
You're muted, Momita.
Yeah, sorry. We have Dr. Sujit Bhattacharya, the next in line. Dr. Bhattacharya, can you please ask your question?
Sujit, you are muted.
No, you are still on. You're muted.
Sorry. Now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Professor Ludo, thank you so much. It's an excellent architecture which is putting into practice. And as I see that a lot of work has gone into it. One question which always comes to my mind when I see all this Querera and this guidance document for bibliometrics, also this Barcelona protocol, is the representation of the South in shaping these frameworks are really missing. So that actually creates what you call a sort of an apprehension that and sort of lack of knowledge gap which is there, which I feel which can be much improved. And why I am saying this, because also in a practitioner's way, I would say that 2 years back, I did this under the UN Science Summit, coordinated this workshop for policy deliberations for strengthening South-South cooperation. And there was a huge number of all these African countries in Asia and the others had connected. So one of the session interestingly went into this open science also. And many of them, the two issues that came across was that about the lack of representations of this open science on these indigenous knowledge systems. And the second was the new type of paywalls that are getting created. You are getting this. So I was very happy when you said it is not only open science, it is about diversity and inclusion also. So I don't know how this, the new type of paywall of not able to publish in a sense. And also one of the things also came across was that they are not getting represented in these academic journals. It is so difficult to get into this. I see that all the problems cannot be solved, but at least it can be flagged in some way or the other. So that can make some differences. So thank you again for this wonderful lecture, and great that Indian Institute of Science, Dr. Abhinandan, Dr. Momita, and how they have connected. And large number of students are connecting also. So in a sense, it looks good that the way you have interacted. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for actually making these comments. I think the point about Global South is a very fair point, and we have a bit of a difficult dynamic here. I think I'm in many ways in a privileged position. I'm in a country where we have quite a lot of resources that are being invested to support agendas like the one I'm advocating for. So we have a lot of capacity to work on this, but I, of course, also bring my own, let's say, positionality. I kind of understand how things work in my country, in the European research system. I don't understand to the same degree how things work in your country or in Africa. And we have indeed a dynamic globally where agendas are being steered, of course, to a certain degree by those actors who happen to be in a position to have the resources to actually work on the agendas. And that does lead, I think, to problematic exclusions. I do want to acknowledge that. I don't think I have an easy solution for that, but I hope that the types of conversations we are having today are part of the solution. And yeah, I really want to, I want to also acknowledge that indeed I see this problem and it is a real problem. Yeah, I guess that's the main thing I want to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ludo. Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. So we have Professor Subaya Arunachalam. His hand is up. Professor Arunachalam, would you please ask the question?
You mentioned about the current situation in India. It's rather disheartening. Our administrators, science administrators, as you said, they are very much after ONYS and commercial subscription to the big five, Elsevier, Springer, and so on, and huge way. Despite a number of requests, they are not willing to change their views. Number two, even the shifting from commercial databases like Scopus and Web of Science, it's only people in the science centers like ours, we are talking about it. But the research scientists who perform in the laboratory, physics, chemistry, biology, material science, and so on, they are not very keen on that, about OpenAlex or even Lens. Incidentally, you talked about OpenAlex several times, but you didn't even mention the Lens. I would like to know the reason. That's also a totally, fully open database. Thirdly, OpenAlex still has a few problems. It's not as neat and clean as Insights and so on. That's a comment I get from my colleagues. And also they seem to be having a very small number of people to work for, unlike Scopus and Web of Science. The team is very small. After Heather Pivot left, only I think Jason Preem and Kylie Demes and a few people remain. And they have to manage the whole affair. It takes time. Luckily for them, your Leiden algorithm and Walden rewrite and things like that help them. So the OpenAlex team should, first of all, strengthen in numbers, and the community around the world, not just Ludo, Waltman and his team, or the team from Leiden University, Cameron, Nyland and company. Many others should join to support them. And third, about subscription, you are talking about OpenAlex do take subscription from libraries and other people. And attitude generally in developing countries is something is free, let us have it free. Let us not pay for it, okay? For example, take Archive. It has been there since 1991, almost 55 years now. Sorry, 35 years. And 35 years, I think, yeah. But only 6 institutions in India today pay for it. Total of less than $10,000. Can you believe it? So there is this problem of unwillingness to pay, and largely because the powers that be, the people who manage science in India, are of that class. They don't want to support open initiatives. It's over. Thank you.
Thank you for these sharing these reflections. Perhaps a few things that I could respond to. I didn't really make an attempt to kind of exhaustively describe this landscape of open data source, open infrastructure. So I realized, and it's good to actually be explicit about it, I realized that there are lots of extremely valuable and important initiatives, including the lens, that I didn't mention. So let me indeed stress that. So thank you for reminding me of that. I spoke about a few initiatives, but there is many, many more. And they all have pros and cons, and we don't have time to go into the details, but it's good to acknowledge that indeed. So I do want to say that indeed there is the lens, there is others. And also I spoke about OpenAlex, but I definitely agree with you. OpenAlex has limitations. There are still all kinds of things that needs to be improved. I think the way I ultimately look at this development, I see it more as kind of an ecosystem that needs to mature, an ecosystem of open data source that ultimately we can all benefit from, and also an ecosystem that offers a certain degree of resilience. So we probably shouldn't become too dependent on any single solution. Also, if this is an open solution like OpenAlex or others, if we become too dependent on one single solution, some of the problems from the past, we might just have them again in a slightly different form. So what we actually need, I think, is an ecosystem of all kinds of open solutions that complement each other, but that also offer this kind of degree of resilience. You mentioned many of these organizations are quite small, so will they still be in existence in a couple of years? Well, if not, then it's good to have backup solutions. And I think that's the direction in which we should move and in which we are actually already moving.
Okay, I think now we have Professor Abhinandan next in line.
You said something about the proprietary databases and how they tend to be non-inclusive and so on. And of course, non-transparency as well. So one of the issues that I keep hearing about with the OpenAlex is that it is way too inclusive. Whereas the data that one gets from proprietary databases like Scopus and Web of Science, at some level, some quality control has gone in, some curation has happened. So would you want to comment about that for somebody who's working on information that is available from these databases? The curated ones at some level seem more attractive. Of course, it's expensive. So I would like your comment about that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question. I think it's a very practical, hands-on issue that many of us, including also myself, that we're often being confronted with. Databases like OpenAlex are very inclusive, comprehensive in a way, but it also means they include lots of things that perhaps we typically would not really consider to be trustworthy science, legitimate science, things that might be produced by kind of bad actors in the system. Proprietary commercial databases also suffer from that problem, but not to the same extent as the open solutions, because the commercial solution, indeed, they have all kinds of processes through which they make selections and exclude certain things. I feel that what we need in the open world is we need filters. We need filters that enable us in easy ways to make decisions on what to include and what to exclude when we are doing particular analysis for particular purposes. And we should have a variety of filters, because there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to the question of what should be in a database, what should not be in a database, what should or should not be included in our research analytics. There's not one single answer. The answer is always context dependent, and therefore we also need a variety of filters. And the OpenAlex database, for instance, provides the CWTS core publications filter. That's a filter that colleagues in my team here in Leiden made. We made it. We feel it's a helpful filter, but we also think it's, for many purposes, it's not the best solution. So this should not be the thing that everyone is now going to use, but it could be one particular element in a broader toolkit of filters. So I hope we can move in that direction. And I also think we need to ultimately think about which actors in the research system actually have a responsibility to kind of do some form of quality assurance, regulation perhaps of kind of this whole publishing landscape where you have so many different journals and you have, of course, lots of journals that do very good, important work, but you also have lots of bad actors. So there's some quite big questions we need to ask ourselves there.
So I have another question, and this is regarding the common view, at least among Indians, that the European scientists and European meta scientists as well have managed to get some sort of a buy-in from other universities as well as the government into making further progress towards open science, openness in information systems and so on. So are there lessons that that we could use from the experience in European countries and the Netherlands in particular, in convincing our own government and our own science administrators into taking us closer to openness?
Yeah, what we see, I think, in the European landscape, we see a strong commitment to open science that goes all the way down from the European Commission to individual member states within the European Union, and then to, for instance, research institutions in those member states. Strong commitment. Of course, sometimes there's a lot of actual action and activity behind these commitments. Sometimes there's not so much. Sometimes it's a little bit more kind of window dressing. But we have indeed overall we have quite a positive and good, let's say, dynamic within the European system around open science, and it is of course very important that we have in Europe we have kind of a situation where we see kind of, I think, top down and bottom up. We see both of them kind of happening at the same time. It's not perfect, far from perfect. It's messy, but in a sense, it's happening with the European Commission and member states, governments pushing to a certain degree for it, but also bottom-up support from communities. I think that's kind of what is needed: top-down and bottom-up getting together. How to get there for instance, your context, I'm not sure if I'm really qualified to say something about it, because I do also want to recognize that I'm not an expert on the way your system is operating. But this idea of bringing top-down and bottom-up together, that seems to be a key ingredient.
Thank you.
Thanks, Abhi. Now we have Dr. Francis next for a question. Dr. Francis, you ask the question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Momita. Thank you, Professor Ludo, for an excellent talk and a very insightful one too. So my question is, commercial tools like SciVal and Insights, which in turn uses Scopus and Web of Science for research analytics. Does OpenAlex support research analytics?
At the moment, they don't provide kind of interfaces similar to what, for instance, Insights or SciVal provide on top of Web of Science and Scopus. They don't provide that. My understanding is that that's actually kind of a deliberate choice, because I understand the OpenAlex philosophy to be a worldview in which end users will more and more be in a position where they themselves can actually just do lots of things that in the past we did using dedicated software tools. So creating dashboards with rich analytics is something for which in the past we used Insights, SciVal. In the future, that's at least, I think, the vision that OpenAlex has. The idea would be that we have AI tools, agentic AI tools. You just talk to your AI tool, you just tell the AI tool what you want, and then somehow the tool produces it for you. So if indeed we are moving in that direction, that would in a way be great, because then you have much more flexibility, you can do much more custom-made analysis. Well, I don't think I'm really an AI expert, so I'm not sure to what extent the technology is really ready for that. But I hear sometimes some really positive and interesting accounts of what is already possible or what is going to be possible quite soon. But we also see, for instance, I mentioned briefly OpenAir. OpenAir takes a different philosophy. They do invest in producing tools a bit similar to Cypher and Insights that provide interfaces on top of the data. So we see also that different actors in this open landscape take different approaches.
Thank you. Another question, not a related one. Now, I understood from your talk that many of the institutions in the Europe, including the ones in your country, they are moving towards stopping the subscription to commercial databases like Scopus and Web of Science. Now, what will happen if a commercial organization like Clarivate or Elsevier buys OpenAlex?
Yeah. Yeah, what will happen is the following. So because OpenAlex is an organization that works in an open way, and the data is openly available, but also source codes are openly available. So anyone can at any point basically continue the operations of OpenAlex. So the way OpenAlex is kind of operating, if for whatever reason they cease to do that because of being bought by a commercial actor, but also could be for other reasons. In principle, anyone could just take the data and the source codes and continue the operations of OpenAlex. Of course, there are practical challenges. It's not entirely straightforward. You need to kind of just deal with the practicalities of understanding how to work with all the data and all these source codes. But in principle, that is possible. And this is actually part of OpenAlex. Also supporting the principles for open scholarly infrastructure that you may be familiar with, the POSI principles. And in the POSI principles, organizations that provide open infrastructures, they make a commitment to facilitating these types of transitions. So even if they are bought by a commercial actor, then still others could continue their operations.
Thank you.
Okay, Professor Arunachalam, one more question. Professor Arunachalam, would you please ask?
Not a question. I'm going to answer Francis. Archive has a clause that it can never be commercialized. For example, right now on July 1st, they are going to become kind of a non-profit company, although they will be in the corner campus. But they will have a CEO, a highly paid CEO, but they won't become a commercial. No one can buy them. That's the way it is written. I'm sure OpenAlex would have written some clause like that. I'm not certain, but going by last example, they would have adopted that. If they have not adopted, now we can inform Jas and Prim, and we can request Jas and Prim to see that it's adopted.
Yeah, I think we also see that many of these open infrastructure organizations, they are developing increasingly, let's say, professional governance structures that also provide safeguards against indeed kind of the organization moving away from its original mission, or indeed the organization being bought by a commercial actor. So these governance structures are also very important. And I think more and more you see that for many of these open infrastructures, they're getting more and more professional in doing this properly.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat by Madan. So I will read it out for you, Ludo. So what he asks is, are interoperable institutional repositories important for open research information? Even if a repository is unable to make the full text open due to embargo or researcher disinterest, can it still maintain and expose comprehensive metadata? Should we reconfigure interoperable repositories to support open citation databases to explore clean and comprehensive metadata to service providers? Yeah, it's a long question.
Yeah, but a very good question. I think the answer is basically yes. Actually, repositories that are operated by, for instance, universities, they are an example of what I mentioned. Barcelona Declaration Commitment 1. A university is not only a user, but also a producer of research information. For instance, through the university repository, where you make outputs available and you attach metadata to these outputs. And when you do that, you produce research information. So the metadata is what I would consider to be the research information. And according to the Barcelona Declaration, that should be made openly available. My own university, for instance, we have a policy. We have a policy through which we indeed commit to making the metadata for the outputs in our repository openly available. And then, of course, that data can be harvested by all kinds of infrastructures like OpenAlex, OpenAir, and others. So I'm definitely supportive of that idea. And the same, by the way, also applies to preprint service. Preprint services is a bit similar, of course. And there we have the same thing. Preprint service should make metadata openly available, and that should then be indexed by downstream databases.
Thank you, Ludo. I don't see any more hands up. I will just still also ask if anyone else have any more question. Okay, it doesn't look like so, but still I would ask a final question then. What I was just thinking about that, because you said about what are the challenges of the commercial databases. Now, one of the major problem that we face in our country is, let's say, the university ranking, or even, let's say, how we define impact, because recently I also saw one more document produced by the NRF, our new funding agency, where, I mean, it's just quite simplified way I'm asking it, that in one place they define impact equating with number of citation impact. Now, my question is that what would be the difference if we have this citation data from Web of Science or Scopus, or if we try to get it from OpenAlex? So what difference will we see? And then also, what will be my argument to convince these authorities that, okay, you take this data from OpenAlex, not from Web of Science or Scopus?
Yeah, so I guess there's two levels perhaps here, in terms of the issues you raised, Momita, if I understood you correctly. So we have, of course, the broader questions around university rankings and how they influence and shape our research system, sometimes in quite problematic ways. So if we steer the research system based on the rankings, then we make a big mistake, because what the rankings provide us is something that is just based on data that happens to be available to the ranking agencies, and that they kind of make available to us under some nice story they tell us about what the data means in terms of how we perform. I'm very skeptical about all of that. And we need to be extremely cautious with the rankings. I would say in most cases best to ignore them, and definitely we shouldn't make decisions based on them. Given the fact that indeed the rankings sometimes are a kind of a reality that we need to acknowledge, that is there, then I think it is in principle it's good if rankings move from closed to open data. I must say I had one or two conversations with ranking agencies, kind of, let's say, informal conversations about this possibility. So I know some ranking agencies are looking into that. It might also for them be a way to kind of reduce their dependency on data providers, which is a bit ironic because they are themselves kind of organizations that own a lot of data and monetize it and all of that. But anyway, I think in principle it's a positive thing if ranking agencies, whatever we think of them, if they move from proprietary to open data sources. And for them, what's in it, I guess, is that they become less dependent on the proprietary providers. But there should not be a mechanism that will then legitimize the rankings, because the rankings in many cases they remain quite problematic for our research system.
Yeah, thanks, Ludo. Do we have any more questions for Professor Ludo Waltman? It seems no. So I think yeah, we have also obviously it's very good discussion and it's had a quite long discussion as well. So I think I will end it with asking Professor Abhinandanan to say a few words to have this session end.
Thanks, Momita. So I'm sure we all agree that we had a wonderful session today, webinar today by Professor Ludo Waltman, and I thank him specifically for this webinar, accepting our invitation. My thanks also to Professor Arunachalam for suggesting this idea, suggesting that we should at DST CPR host this webinar. And it has been a very useful exercise. We learned a lot about the European system and how some of those ideas may be applied here when we talk to our own decision makers. So all in all, it has been a wonderful experience. Thank you very much. And with that, I guess we can close. But before that, maybe I can ask you, I thought you said right at the beginning something about the color choices you made for the presentation.
Yeah, it's the colors
Yeah,
of the Barcelona Declaration. So the Barcelona Declaration has this kind of color that is orange yellow type of color, and it's kind of anything that's about open research information about the Barcelona Declaration. I like to present it in that way.
Okay. So all right. So yeah, once again, thank you very much. And with that, I think we can close this session. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you for the kind invitation. I really appreciated the exchange. Thank you so much.